This is Schooled by Gru, and this episode is entitled Plea to Publishers, More Equitable Rulebooks Needed. This is Schooled by Gru, an exclusive series for Our Family Plays Games Voices, where I do a deep dive into my PhD dissertation research and share with you the findings before the rest of the world sees it, exclusively on Our Family Plays Games. In December 2020, a co-author and I, Dr. Shelley Jones, created a very scholarly article about gender equity in board game rulebooks. This was in response to fora discussion on Board Game Geek, for instance, that had posts like this. This is a quote. "They're not interested in learning a board game which uses only masculine pronouns." And this quote was about a game group, and the poster was complaining about the fact that the game group was resisting board games that had rule books that used he in reference to player. So I set about reading 744 pages worth of board game rule books to determine if the word he was used more than the word she, and what I found was he occurred at 73.8% of the time, and she 26.2% of the time. Having spent most of my career in marketing, I was looking for the invitation in the rulebook, particularly for players who don't identify as men. In this case, I looked for any feminine playable characters and found that 16 of the 40 games analyzed had any playable characters that appeared to be women or girls whatsoever. 15 had no gendered playable characters, were abstracts, and 7 of the games of the 40 had masculine-only playable characters. The question that often arises when I do this work is how new were these games? And in this case, 24 of the 40 games analyzed were 5 years or newer. This list of 40 games was selected from the top 40 ranked Board Game Geek board games. And what I was surprised to discover is only 11 of the 40 got top marks in terms of gender equities in their rulebooks, which was a really disappointing finding. The average score was 70%, sort of a meh score. And I again was surprised given this was the cream of the crop in terms of Board Game Geek ranked games. This video was inspired by Tom Vassell and the Dice Tower's Plea to Publisher series, which my partner and I have been watching through and enjoying. We are regularly approached, Dr. Jones and I, for advice about rulebooks, and I thought I would take the opportunity to share some of our top-line findings. 1. Use of the singular they in your rulebook. If it was good enough for common use in the 1300s in English literature, it's good enough for you. It is absolutely proper grammar to use the singular they. The second bit of advice is using the declarative or the imperative. So if your dad asks you to hand him a hammer, he will likely say, "Will you please hand me that hammer?" In this case, with a rulebook, you can use the declarative, which is, then you shuffle the cards, then you deal 5 cards to the player on your left, for example. So using the declarative or imperative creates a feeling of intimacy as though you're speaking to the reader, and is highly effective when teaching someone. This entire piece and my PhD dissertation research is all about creating a big tent hobby. The more people that can fit under the tent, the better. Publishers then have the necessary conditions for economic flourishing, and the hobby becomes more vital and welcoming. This particular article can be found on analoggamestudies.org and was once again authored by myself and Dr. Shelley Jones. It's entitled Pronouns in Play, an analysis of gender-inclusive language and imagery in the top 40 ranked Board Game Geek games. Thank you so much for listening.